Somewhere in the dairy aisle, there is a carton of milk that costs less than a bottle of water. It sits there, unremarkable, restocked every single day without fail. Almost nobody thinks about how strange that is. Milk is not a plant that grows in a field and gets harvested once a season. It comes from a living mammal, and mammals only produce milk for one biological reason. They have just given birth. For a dairy cow to make milk, she must first have a calf. Every glass of milk, every block of cheese, every scoop of ice cream begins with a birth. And here's the detail almost no one considers. About half of those births are male. Most people assume the male calf simply grows up to become a bull, or maybe a beef cow, quietly absorbed into the broader cattle industry. That assumption feels logical. If female cows are for milk, surely male cows are for meat. Problem solved, nothing wasted. But this is where the common understanding breaks down. A male dairy calf is not simply a beef cow with a different name. He is, from the moment he is born, the wrong tool for almost every job the modern cattle industry needs done. He cannot produce milk, obviously, but he also isn't particularly good at producing beef. At least not the way the beef industry is optimized to produce it. He exists in an economic gap between two industries that were each engineered, with extraordinary precision, for something else entirely. To understand why, you have to look at what a dairy cow actually is. Over the last century, dairy breeds like the Holstein were selectively bred for one metric almost above all others: milk yield. Generation after generation, the cows that produced the most milk were bred forward, while traits like muscle mass, body frame for meat production, and feed efficiency for weight gain were not the priority. Think of it like optimizing a car engine purely for fuel efficiency. At the total expense of horsepower, you end up with a machine that is extraordinary at one function and mediocre at the other. A modern Holstein cow can produce over 10 gallons of milk a day, an output that would have seemed impossible a century ago. But that same genetic lineage, when expressed in a male body, produces an animal that grows more slowly, carries less muscle, and converts feed into meat far less efficiently than a calf bred specifically for beef. Meanwhile, the beef industry has been running its own parallel optimization experiment. Breeds like Angus were selected for exactly the traits dairy breeds were not: fast growth, dense muscle, high feed-to-meat conversion. A beef calf can be economically finished for slaughter in a way that is measurably cheaper and faster than a dairy breed male. So when a male Holstein calf is born, he is entering a market where beef producers can simply choose a different animal, one engineered specifically for their business model, at a lower cost per pound of usable meat. The male dairy calf isn't excluded from the beef industry by some kind of prejudice or waste. He is excluded by math. He costs more to raise and returns less at slaughter than the animal built for the job. This is the mechanism at the center of the entire issue, and it becomes clearer with a simple analogy. Imagine two factories. One factory is built and tuned to produce paper as efficiently as physically possible. Every machine, every process, every input is optimized around that single output. The other factory is tuned entirely around producing plastic. Now imagine the paper factory occasionally, as an unavoidable side effect of its process, generates a small amount of raw material that could theoretically be used to make plastic. It's technically usable, but the plastic factory next door has machines built specifically to turn its own optimized raw material into plastic at a far lower cost. So the byproduct from the paper factory sits there, technically valuable, but not valuable enough to justify the cost of processing it through a system that wasn't built for it. That byproduct is the male dairy calf. He isn't waste in the sense of having zero value. He is waste in the economic sense, an output nobody is set up to profitably use. This leads directly into the brutal cost-benefit analysis that actually drives farm-level decisions. And it is worth being precise about what that analysis looks like. A newborn calf, from the moment of birth, requires feed, veterinary care, housing, and labor, none of which are free. A dairy farm's profitability is built around one asset: the milking female. Every day of resources spent on an animal that will never produce milk is a day of resources not generating the return the entire operation is designed around. For decades, in many parts of the world, the calculation was straightforward and stark. A newborn male calf might be sold at auction for a very small sum, sometimes barely covering the cost of the truck ride to get him there, or in some cases, the price fell so low that transporting him cost more than his sale value. In those cases, some farms made the calculated decision to euthanize male calves within days of birth, not out of malice, but because the alternative, raising an animal for months at a financial loss, made even less economic sense within that system. This practice drew significant public attention and criticism in the 2010s, particularly in the dairy industries of the United Kingdom, parts of Europe, and the United States, and it forced the industry to confront the economics rather than simply the optics. What emerged in response is genuinely interesting from a systems design perspective, because it shows how quickly an industry can re-optimize once the underlying incentive structure shifts. One major development is a technology called sexed semen, which allows dairy farmers to dramatically increase the odds that a calf will be born female, in some cases achieving accuracy rates above 90%. This doesn't eliminate the issue, but it shrinks it considerably at the source, meaning fewer unwanted male calves are born into the system in the first place. It's a striking example of an industry attempting to engineer its way around a biological constraint, rather than manage the constraint after the fact. The second major shift has been the rise of what's often called beef-on-dairy breeding, where instead of breeding a dairy cow with dairy genetics purely to produce a replacement milking female, farmers intentionally breed a portion of their herd with beef bull semen. The resulting calf is a crossbreed, carrying some of the growth and muscle traits of a beef animal, while still being born from a dairy cow. This calf is far more valuable at auction than a purebred dairy male, because he's now a genuinely more efficient candidate for the beef supply chain. In effect, the industry looked at the economic gap the male calf was falling into and built a genetic bridge to close it. It's not a sentimental solution, it's a supply chain optimization, but one that happens to also reduce the number of calves with no viable market at all. It's worth stepping back here and contrasting this modern, highly engineered system with how dairy farming operated historically, because the contrast reveals just how much industrial optimization has reshaped the relationship between farmer and animal. On smaller, mixed farms of the past, a single farm often kept both dairy and beef animals, and cattle breeds themselves were far less specialized. A farm might raise a general-purpose breed of cattle that provided a moderate amount of milk and also grew into reasonably useful meat, essentially spreading the biological function across a less efficient but more flexible animal. In that world, a male calf wasn't a mismatched output between two hyper-specialized industries, because those industries hadn't yet split apart and optimized independently of each other. He would simply be raised for meat on the same farm, in the same system, without needing to cross into an entirely separate supply chain, engineered for a different genetic profile. What changed wasn't cruelty or carelessness. What changed was specialization itself. As dairy farming and beef farming each became their own highly optimized industries, competing globally on efficiency and cost, the animals themselves diverged genetically to serve those separate goals. This is, in many ways, a pattern that shows up again and again whenever humans intensively optimize a biological or agricultural system for a single output. Chickens bred exclusively for egg production lay far more eggs than their ancestors ever could, but males of those same egg-laying breeds carry almost no meat and are commercially unwanted for similar structural reasons. The same underlying pattern quietly plays out across egg farming, seed production, and even certain areas of pharmaceutical manufacturing. Wherever a biological process that naturally produces two outcomes gets industrially optimized around demand for only one of them, which brings this to the deeper pattern underneath the specific story of the calf. Nature does not produce single-purpose outputs. Reproduction, by its very design, generates both sexes in roughly equal measure, because that is what a biological system needs to sustain itself over generations. But industrial systems are not built around biological balance. They are built around market demand, and market demand for milk has no inherent need for an equal number of males and females. When humans took a natural process and re-engineered it for maximum output along a single axis, the byproduct wasn't a flaw in the system. It was structurally unavoidable, an emergent consequence of optimizing something that was never naturally meant to be optimized for just one outcome. This is, in a sense, the quiet cost hidden inside a huge amount of human intervention into biological systems. Every time efficiency is maximized along one dimension, something else gets pushed to the margins, not through intention, but through the simple mathematics of specialization. The male dairy calf is not a villain in this story, and he isn't quite a victim of one either. He is closer to a structural remainder, the leftover value in an equation that was never designed with him in mind. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part of the whole picture. It isn't a story about bad actors making cruel choices. It's a story about what happens, almost automatically, whenever a natural process gets folded into a system built entirely around a single, narrow definition of value.